Hi, I'm Bob Dodge from Artemis Gallery. I started Artemis Gallery about 25 years ago, and today I would like to talk about a subject that is of utmost importance to collectors, dealers, and anyone actively involved in this business. That topic is the laws covering cultural patrimony and cultural property. A very serious topic. Now, let me start out. I'm not an attorney. The advice that I am giving is based on many conversations that I've had with attorneys, with members of the law enforcement community. But again, this is not legal advice, but this is my advice as a dealer of antiquities to primarily collectors of antiquities. So what is cultural patrimony? What is cultural property? If you've been collecting antiquities for any time, you know that these items are regulated by the countries from where they came. And there are lots of laws and there are lots of areas of confusion about these laws. So I'm going to try and separate the hype from reality. Is it important? It's critically important. This is something you must know about as a collector. Dealers, if you don't know about it, you shouldn't be dealers. So let's talk about some of the basics of this. There is a major issue around the world with people smuggling antiquities and ancient art, an art that is important to these countries, into the United States, into Europe, and we wholeheartedly are in support of all laws to prevent that. However, there are thousands and tens of thousands and probably hundreds of thousands of pieces of ancient art and cultural items that have been out of these countries for decades, certainly centuries. We've seen items with prominence that dates back into the 1700s. So what do you do with items like that, and what are the laws that cover cultural property in general? Well, first of all, in 1983, the United Nations held a conference called Unesco. And Unesco was a number of countries around the world getting together and creating a treaty that started to regulate the exportation of cultural property. But a lot of people think, okay, 1983, magic date, that's the date you have to be concerned with. Well, in the United States, and if you're in Europe or other countries, research what your specific country's dates are. But in the United States, 1983 isn't a magic date. In 1983, UNESCO was signed, but that is it's an agreement, but it's not a law. So the first law that came about as a result of UNESCO was ironically, in the United States in 1983, and it's called the Cultural Property Implementation Act. And it basically put some things into place that allowed law enforcement to prevent the smuggling of items from these countries where items are found into the United States. But the UNESCO Treaty and the Cultural Property Implementation Act basically states the United States will enter into agreements with select countries around the world to prevent the illicit importation. And if you are not on this list of what is currently 17 different countries, it is still legal, believe it or not, to import items from those countries into the United States, or it's legal to accept items from those countries. So there are only 17 countries in which the United States has treaties that prevent the importation of cultural property. I recommend you go onto the U.S. State Department website and take a look at these specific countries and treaties. Each one was signed on a different date. Peru, for example, was 1993. Italy was 2000. Egypt was 1983. So every country that is part of this 17-member law has a different date of implementation. So become familiar with the Cultural Property Implementation Act and the specific dates of importation. Now, that's one set of laws. That basically has some provisions that are actually nice from a collector's or dealer standpoint. There's what is called a safe harbor provision of the Cultural Property Implementation Act that allows items that have been in the United States for greater than 20 years to be awarded safe harbor. It means that if you can prove that they've been in the United States for longer than 20 years, in theory, according to this law, they're now legal. It's okay for you as a collector to own them, for me as a dealer to buy and sell them. There's another law that came into place, and that's called the Stolen Property Act. And that act basically says the CPIA is meaningless. The Stolen Property Act basically says if an item is stolen, it's stolen. So it doesn't matter if it was stolen 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. If this item was smuggled out of a foreign country and they had laws in place that prevented that, the United States can enforce those laws of those countries. So it takes those 17 states that we've got treaties with and laws enforcing and says, doesn't matter. Fortunately, that law is seldom, if ever, used, but it can be. So there are some provisions of that you should know. Basically, an item has to be of value greater than $5,000, and you have to know that it was smuggled. So it gives us a little bit of protection, but be aware that there is a law that could potentially be used against us as a dealer, you as a collector, that prevents us from buying anything that was ever smuggled. So what do these laws mean? In essence, be smart, be aware. So go take a look at the Unesco Treaty. Go take a look at the Cultural Property Implementation Act. When you're buying antiquities, ask questions. Do not assume that an item is legal to buy or sell just because you're getting it from a dealer. Does the dealer have rock-solid provenance? So let's talk about what is rock-solid provenance. As a dealer, often we are contacted by clients whose grandparents traveled to Peru in the 1950s, or aunts who happened to travel to Egypt in the 1940s, 50s, 60s. And these individuals have since died and passed the collections along to their children. Is that rock-solid provenance? On its own, no. But if there is a letter and a signed notarized document from the family stating that this is how these items entered into the United States, that's often as good as it gets. And with conversations that we've had with the U.S. Customs Department and the FBI, so far they are accepting these kind of documents as proof that the items entered the U.S. legally. So get signed, documented evidence that an item is legally entered into the United States. Don't take a dealer's word that yes, it came in the 1950s from the whatever estate it happened to be. When you get an item, make sure that it is accompanied by a receipt that states that provenance so that you've got written documentation that will protect you. So if there's any doubt in an item being recently imported into the United States, don't take a chance. It just isn't worth it. Over the last couple of years, the law enforcement agencies are getting much tougher, much more strict. I can rattle off a handful of individuals that we've known personally that have made mistakes and imported things in improperly. You just don't need to buy things that are recently imported. There are plenty of items that have been in the United States for decades and decades that there is no reason to risk buying items that are newly imported. Next, if you're importing items from other countries, or you're exporting items, you're sending something to a dealer or a friend in Europe, or having something coming in from a dealer from Europe, don't lie on the forms. The quickest and easiest way to break the law and have something seized is by lying on the customs forms. The U.S. is one of those wonderful places where we don't pay import duties on antiques that are over 100 years old. There's no reason to lie on customs forms. So if you're importing something from an auction house in Europe, state the country of origin, specifically where this thing was manufactured. Not the country you're buying it from, but the country it's manufactured manufactured from. Don't lie about the value. It doesn't matter if the value is $100 or $100,000. There are no duties on that item. Get provenance in writing on everything that is being imported and have that documentation in those shipments when they come in. So don't mess around with the laws. We could, again, rattle off dealers that we've known in various states and shipments that we know of $2+ million of Egyptian antiquities that have been seized. Don't go that route. It's simply not worth it. There are a number of very legitimate dealers. They're more than happy to show you the provenance. Don't make mistakes. It's a growing issue, but as a collector, it's not an issue that should prevent you from buying safely and continuing this wonderful hobby that we all enjoy. This is Bob Dodge, Artemis Gallery. Thanks for watching.